Betrayed girl was saved by the vampire king. Then she returned as a queen. Drink the wine, Orvelin. It is for the peace of the realm, Aldrich Stormborn had whispered, his hand steady, even as his eyes avoided hers. The liquid was sweet, tasting of summer plums and a metallic sharpness she mistook for spice. Within minutes, the world tilted. The faces of those she loved, Sebastian Fernwell's calculating smirk and Celestia Lakewood's pitying gaze, blurred into a mosaic of treachery. She was not being honored. She was being discarded. As the carriage doors locked and the horses were whipped toward the forbidden peaks, Avalyn realized the truth. They weren't sending her to marry a lord. They were offering her as a peace offering to the hunger of the night. The wind did not just blow in the forbidden peaks, it shrieked. It was a sound like bone scraping against frozen stone, a dissonant, ancient choir that heralded the end of a world Aveline no longer recognized. She lay in the bed of the wagon, her limbs feeling like leaden weights, unresponsive to her frantic mental commands. The bindings were the worst part, not rope or leather, but silver-threaded silk. Every time the wagon jolted over a frozen root, the silver burned against her wrists and ankles, a searing, magical heat that contrasted cruelly with the numbing frost. The poison in the wine, a sedative laced with rowan and ash, had left her mind crystalline and sharp, a spectator to her own demise. She watched the sky through the gaps in the wooden cage. The stars were cold, indifferent pinpricks of white light against an obsidian void. Above her, the great iron gates of the pass groaned open with a sound like a dying giant. She heard the voices of the guards, their words muffled by their thick, fur-lined hoods and the chattering of their own teeth. "Leave the girl and the horses," one said. His voice was familiar. Thomas, a man who had sat at her father's table and laughed at her jokes. "If we stay a minute longer, the king will smell the fear on us." "Do you think he'll actually take her?" another whispered, his breath hitching in a frantic puff of white vapor. "He hasn't taken a tribute in a century, but the Stormborn say the treaty requires a Lakewood or an equivalent bloodline. Avalyn. She's the last of the line they can afford to lose, the only one whose absence won't start a civil war." There was a heavy thud as the wagon was unhitched. The horses whinnied, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror that vibrated through the floorboards under Avalyn's cheek. The guards retreated, their footsteps frantic and uneven, receding into the distance until only the oppressive silence of the mountains remained. Avalyn's heart beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Thump-thump. Thump-thump. It was the only warm thing left in this desolate place, a small, fragile engine struggling against an ocean of ice. The cold began its slow, methodical invasion. It started at her fingertips, numbing them until they felt like brittle glass, then moved up her arms, chasing the heat toward her core. She tried to roll, to throw herself from the wagon, but the silver silk knotted tighter with every movement, whispering of her family's betrayal. "Aldrich," she breathed, her voice a mere puff of frost that vanished instantly. He had promised her a future. He had spoken of children with her eyes, and a manor by the sea where the wind didn't bite. He had kissed her forehead before handing her the cup. The memory of that kiss felt like a jagged glass shard lodged in her soul, twisting with every shallow breath. An hour passed. Or perhaps it was an eternity. The horses began to kick at the traces, their eyes rolling back to show the whites in the moonlight. They felt it before she did, a shift in the pressure of the air, a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. The shadows at the edge of the clearing began to move, detaching themselves from the ancient pines. They didn't walk. They flowed like spilled ink across the snow, silent and inevitable. Aveline forced her head to turn. A man stood at the edge of the clearing. He was tall, his silhouette sharp and predatory against the moon's silver disk. He wore a cloak of heavy black velvet that seemed to absorb the light around it, creating a hole in the world. His hair was the color of a winter's midnight, and even from 20 paces she could see the glow of his eyes. Not the blood red of the tavern tales, but a burning, molten gold, like the core of a dying star. Cassian Ravensfall, the king of the Hollow. He approached the wagon with a slow, terrifying grace. Each step was silent. The snow didn't even crunch beneath his boots. The horses collapsed where they stood, not from violence, but from sheer sensory overload, their hearts simply stopping in the presence of the apex predator. He reached the side of the wagon and looked down at her. Aveline stared back, her defiance the only thing the cold hadn't taken. She expected a monster. She expected fangs and a guttural roar. Instead, she found a face of haunting, marble-like beauty. Features carved from the very sorrow of the earth, eyes that looked as if they had seen the birth and death of eons. "A gift," he said. His voice was a low cello note, vibrating in the marrow of her bones. Or an insult. He reached out a hand. His fingers were long and elegant, tipped with nails that looked like polished obsidian. As his hand hovered over her, the silver silk began to smoke, hissing as it met a power greater than its own. With a flick of his wrist, the binding snapped, crumbling into grey ash that the wind instantly carried away. Aveline felt the blood rush back into her limbs, a searing, agonizing heat that made her gasp. She tried to speak, her lungs burning. "They sent me to die," she managed to whisper, her eyes locked onto his golden ones. "They thought you were a beast who would tear me apart." Cassian leaned in, his face inches from hers. She could smell him, not of rot or blood, but of ancient cedarwood, cold mountain rain, and something spicy like cloves. He didn't breathe. There was no rise and fall of his chest. He was a statue given the terrible gift of motion. "The humans are very good at projecting their own natures onto me," he said softly. He reached out and touched her cheek. His skin was colder than the snow, yet the contact felt like a brand. "You are dying, little bird. Your heart is slowing. Why should I save a broken thing that your own kind has discarded?" "Because," Aveline said, her voice strengthening with a sudden, sharp clarity born of pure spite. "I want to see their faces when I return. I want to see Aldrich's eyes when he realizes the beast didn't eat me. He made me." A flicker of something, amusement, recognition, perhaps a ghost of a long-dead empathy, passed through the king's eyes. He didn't speak again. Instead, he reached down and scooped her into his arms. She was nothing to him, a feather caught in a storm. As he turned toward the darkness of the mountain, Aveline felt the world slip away into a velvet blackness. The last thing she felt was the steady, unyielding cold of his chest against her ear, and the terrifying realization that for the first time in her life, she felt safe. Aveline woke to the sound of fire. It wasn't the roar of a bonfire, but the rhythmic, comforting crackle of a hearth. The air was warm, smelling of lavender and old paper. She opened her eyes and found herself in a bed of impossible size, draped in silks the color of dried blood. The walls were made of dark, polished stone, soaring upward into vaulted arches where shadows danced like living things. She tried to sit up, but a sharp pain flared in her chest. "Quiet, child. The frost still bites at your lungs." Aveline turned her head. Sitting in a high-backed chair by the fire was a woman with skin the color of hammered copper and hair braided with silver coins. She looked ancient, yet her eyes were sharp and vital. "Who are you?" Aveline asked, her voice raspy. "I am Tanith," the woman said, standing up. "I am the keeper of this house, and you are the first living guest we have had in 3 lifetimes. Where is he, the king?" Tanith gestured toward the far end of the room, where a massive set of double doors stood slightly ajar. "Cassian is in the archives. He is deciding what to do with you. Usually the tributes are disposed of. But you have the Lakewood mark upon your spirit. He finds that curious." Aveline looked down at her hands. They were pale, almost translucent, but the black rot of frostbite was gone, replaced by faint, silvery scars. "He saved me." "He claimed you," Tanith corrected, her expression unreadable. "There is a difference." Over the next few days, Aveline explored the boundaries of her golden cage. The citadel of Ravensfall was a labyrinth of memory. Every hallway was lined with portraits of people long dead, lords and ladies in stiff collars, their eyes following her with a silent, frozen judgment. There were no mirrors, not a single one. She eventually found the archives. It was a room that felt larger than the forest she had been abandoned in. Thousands of scrolls and leather-bound books lined the walls, some so old they looked like they would crumble into dust if breathed upon. At the center of the room, sitting at a desk carved from a single piece of black oak, was Cassian. He was reading a map, his brow furrowed in concentration. He wore no crown, yet the very air around him seemed to bow. Aveline approached him, her bare feet silent on the stone floor. She didn't stop until she was standing directly across from him. "Why haven't you killed me?" she asked. Cassian didn't look up. "Death is a very final thing, Aveline. I find it lacks imagination. Besides, the Stormborns and the Fernwells believe you are already dead. Their grief is a performance I find quite entertaining from a distance." "They aren't grieving," she said sharply. "They are celebrating. They have my lands now. They have the Lakewood trade routes. They have everything they wanted." Now, Cassian looked up. The golden glow of his eyes seemed to dim, turning into the color of aged honey. "Is that what you want? Your lands? Your trade routes?" "I want them to feel what I felt," she said, her voice trembling. "The cold, the silence, the weight of the silver chains." Cassian stood up. He was a head taller than her, a pillar of darkness in the candlelight. He walked around the desk, stopping just inches from her. He reached out and traced the line of her jaw. "Vengeance is a heavy burden for a human," he whispered. "It requires a heart that can turn to stone. Yours is still too soft. It still beats too loudly." "Then teach me," Aveline challenged, stepping closer into his space. "Teach me how to be like you. Teach me how to stop feeling the sting of their betrayal." Cassian's hand dropped. His expression shifted into something cold and distant. "You do not know what you ask. To be like me is to be a spectator to history, to watch everything you love wither and turn to ash while you remain unchanged. It is a hunger that never ends, and a thirst that no ocean can quench." "I am already a ghost," she said. "The Aveline who loved Aldrich died in the snow. I am just what's left." Cassian studied her for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He took her hand and pressed it against his own chest. There was no heartbeat, no warmth, just a solid, unyielding stillness. "If you stay," he said, "you stay as my guest, not my prisoner. But if you wish to return to the world of men as a queen, you must first survive the winter of the soul. I will show you the truth of the world, Aveline. But once you see it, you can never go back to the girl in the cage." "I don't want to go back," she said. In that moment, a bond was forged. It wasn't love. Not yet. It was the mutual recognition of two souls who had been cast out by the light. The training began not with swords, but with the senses. Cassian took Aveline to the highest parapet of the citadel. The wind here was fierce, but he stood as a shield against it, his cloak creating a pocket of stillness for her. "Close your eyes," he commanded. She obeyed. "Tell me what you hear." "The wind," she said. "The snow hitting the stone." "Deeper." She concentrated. She let the noise of the world fall away. "I hear the movement of water deep beneath the mountain. I hear the horses in the stables, their breathing steady now. I hear the sound of a fire burning 3 floors below us. And what do you smell? Cedar, dust, and—" She paused, her nose wrinkling. "Something sharp, metallic." "That is the scent of the living," Cassian said. "A fox, a mile down the slope. It is hunting. You must learn to distinguish the scent of intent, the difference between a predator and a passerby." Days bled into weeks. Aveline's body grew strong. The pallor of her illness was replaced by a healthy, vibrant glow, though her skin remained pale. She spent her nights with Cassian in the archives, and her days with Tanith learning the history of the Hollow. She learned that Cassian wasn't born a vampire. He had been a king of a forgotten era, betrayed by his own brothers just as she had been by Aldrich. He had chosen the curse to save his people from an invading army, sacrificing his soul to become the shield of the mountain. But his people had eventually feared him more than the invaders, and they had left him alone in the dark. One evening, as the first spring thaw began to drip from the eaves, Aveline found Cassian in the garden. It was a place of strange, bioluminescent plants that bloomed only in the dark. He was tending to a rose that was as black as coal. "You look troubled," Aveline said, walking toward him. He didn't turn. "The humans are moving. Aldrich Stormborn has declared himself High King. He is consolidating power. He has announced his engagement to Celestia Lakewood." The name hit Aveline like a physical blow. Celestia, her cousin, her friend, who had wept as the wagon pulled away. "They are merging the bloodlines," she whispered, "to legitimize his claim." "They believe the Hollow is weak," Cassian said, finally turning to face her. "They are planning an expedition. They want the silver mines beneath this mountain. They think I am a myth they can finally slay." Aveline felt a surge of cold fury. "They want to finish what they started." Cassian walked to her, his movements fluid. He reached into his cloak and pulled out a small crystal vial. Inside was a liquid that shimmered like liquid starlight. "This is the essence of the Hollow," he said. "It is the distilled power of the mountain. If you drink it, your human frailty will fade. You will gain the strength of the earth and the speed of the shadow. But it comes with a price." "What price?" "You will belong to the night," he said softly. "You will feel the sun as a distant memory. And your heart, it will not stop, but it will beat for only one person. The one who gave you the gift." Aveline looked at the vial. Then she looked at Cassian. She saw the loneliness in his eyes, the centuries of isolation he had endured. She saw the man behind the monster, and the king behind the curse. "I am already yours, Cassian," she said. "You saved the girl. Now, help me become the queen." She took the vial and drank. It wasn't painful. It was a flood of ice and fire, a reorganization of her very essence. Her vision sharpened until she could see the individual flakes of frost on the leaves. Her hearing expanded until she could hear the sap rising in the trees. And when she looked at Cassian, she didn't just see him, she felt him. A tether of golden light connected her heart to his. He reached out and pulled her into his arms. This time he wasn't cold. To her new senses, he felt like a roaring furnace, a source of infinite strength. "The hunt begins," he whispered against her hair. Evelyn smiled, her teeth appearing sharper in the moonlight. "No, Cassian, the reckoning begins." As they stood in the garden, a low howl echoed from the pass. The human army was coming, but they had no idea that the girl they had thrown to the wolves was coming back as the king. The transition was not merely a sharpening of senses. It was a total recalibration of her existence, a slow burning metamorphosis that made her old life feel like a faded dream. Evelyn stood at the edge of the frozen waterfall, watching the water suspended in time. Before, it was just ice, a static, cold thing. Now she could see the microscopic vibrations of the molecules, the way the light refracted through the crystalline structures like a shattered diamond. She felt the mountain itself, a massive, slow-beating heart made of granite and quartz. The essence didn't just change her blood, it connected her to the very roots of the forbidden peaks. She could feel the tectonic weight of the earth pressing upward, a silent power that begged to be harnessed. "Do you feel the pull of the stone?" Cassian's voice drifted to her. He was standing 20 feet away, his silhouette blending into the darkening pines. Yet to her eyes, he was as clear as a beacon. "The mountain," she whispered, her voice vibrating with a new, resonant depth. "It's heavy, but it's not a burden. It's a foundation. I feel like I could step through the rock and come out the other side." Cassian turned, his golden eyes burning with a mixture of pride and something that looked dangerously like longing. Since she had taken the essence, the air between them had become electric. Every time he came near, her skin hummed with a frequency her human mind could never have perceived. Her new heart, still beating but slow and powerful like the tolling of a distant bell, seemed to synchronize with the rhythmic silence of his. "Your body is no longer a cage of meat and bone," he said, stepping toward her with that silent, liquid gait that defied the crunch of snow. "It is a vessel for the hollow. You can move with the shadows, Aveline. You can be where you are not seen, because you are becoming part of the world's hidden spaces." "Show me," she challenged. In a blur of movement that her human eyes would have missed entirely, Cassian disappeared. He didn't run. He simply dissolved into the darkness of the pines, a ripple in the fabric of the night. Aveline didn't panic. She closed her eyes and reached out with her mind, ignoring the wind and the cold. She followed the tether, that golden thread that bound her spirit to his. She felt him behind her, a pocket of cool air and ancient power. She didn't turn. Instead, she let herself fall backward, letting gravity take her toward the jagged ice below. Just before she hit the surface, she willed her physical form to match the fluidity of her thoughts. There was a sensation of being stretched thin, like silk on a loom, a moment of weightless void, and then a sudden, jarring solidification. She was standing 10 paces away on a high ledge, breathless, her fingers tingling with residual energy. Cassian was right where she had been, his hands out as if to catch a falling star, his expression one of genuine surprise. "You don't just learn," he noted, his voice low. "You remember. It's as if the hollow has been waiting for you." They spent the night moving through the forest. Aveline felt a wild, primal joy she had never known in the stiff courts of her youth. She jumped from the highest cliffs, landing with the lightness of a snowflake. She ran so fast the world became a streak of moonlight and shadow. She was no longer the fragile girl who had been traded for peace. She was a weapon, forged in the dark. Near dawn, as the sky began to turn a bruised purple, they reached the edge of the pass. Below them, in the valley, A sprawling encampment of tents had appeared, looking like a festering wound on the pristine white snow. They were white and gold, the colors of the Stormborns. Aveline crouched low, her eyes narrowing until the pupils were thin slits. She could smell them from here. The acrid, oily scent of horses, the metallic tang of polished steel, and the sour, pervasive smell of human fear, masked by the arrogance of their banners. "They brought siege engines," she whispered, her voice a low growl that vibrated in her chest. "They think they can break the mountain. They seek the silver," Cassian said, his hand dropping to the hilt of his black steel sword. "But they will find only their own graves." Suddenly, Aveline froze. A scent drifted up on the wind. Cloves, expensive lavender oil, and the underlying scent of rot that always clung to those who dealt in lies. It was a scent she knew intimately. "Sebastian Fernwell," she hissed. "He's here. He always was the one to scout the path for Aldrich's greed." "His scouts are already in the trees," Cassian said. "They have been searching for the secret paths, thinking the mountain is just a puzzle to be solved." Aveline felt a surge of cold, calculating hunger. Let them find the paths. Let them think they have found a way into the heart of the archives. I want to be the one they meet in the dark. Cassian looked at her, his expression softening for a fleeting second. He reached out and brushed a stray lock of hair from her face. His touch was no longer cold. To her, it felt like home. "You are becoming a queen of the night, Aveline. But remember, vengeance is a fire. It can light your way, or it can consume everything you are until there is nothing left but a cold, dark throne." "I am already ash, Cassian," she said, her eyes glowing with a sudden, fierce light. "I just want to make sure they burn with me." The citadel was silent, but it was the silence of a held breath, of a world waiting for the first strike of a hammer. Aveline found herself in the lower vaults, a place where the air was thick with the scent of damp stone, ancient history, and the lingering echoes of voices long dead. Cassian had brought her here to show her the foundations of his world, the truth that the history books had scrubbed clean. "In the world above," he began, his voice echoing in the chamber like the tolling of a bell, "they say I am a monster who stole the throne from my own kin. They tell stories of me bathing in the blood of my brothers to gain this immortality." He stopped before a massive stone sarcophagus. It wasn't decorated with the gaudy gold or jewels of the Stormborn kings, but with simple, elegant runes that seemed to pulse with a faint internal light. "This is my brother, Elowen," Cassian said softly, his hand resting on the stone. "He was the one they said I murdered in cold blood. In truth, he was the one who betrayed our people. He had opened the gates to the invaders, selling our children into slavery in exchange for a promise of a puppet crown and a drop of forbidden alchemy. I didn't kill him for a crown. I killed him because a king who betrays his people has no right to his head." Aveline walked to the sarcophagus, laying her hand on the cool stone. She felt a residual flicker of sorrow. The history books are written by the survivors. They made you the monster, so they could feel like heroes for running away. "Exactly," Cassian said, turning to her. "The Stormborns didn't rise to power through honor. They rose because they were the ones who turned their backs on the Hollow when the first shadow fell. They are the descendants of the cowards who fled the mountain and called it a tactical retreat." He stepped closer, the torchlight casting long, flickering shadows behind them. "That is why they fear me, not because I drink blood, but because I am the living memory of their greatest shame. I am the shadow that proves their light is a lie." "And what am I?" Aveline asked. "A Lakewood. My family was part of that flight. My ancestors were among those who left you here to rot." "You are the exception," he said, his voice dropping to a rough velvet. He stepped closer until their chests were almost touching, and she could feel the cold radiance of his power. "You were the one they chose to sacrifice to appease the memory of their guilt. In doing so, they severed the last link to their own humanity. They gave you to the mountain, and the mountain gave you to me." The word "Miu" vibrated through the air, hitting Aveline with the force of a physical blow. She looked up at him, her breath hitching. The hunger she felt wasn't for blood, not yet, but for the connection that was deepening between them every second. It was a gravitational pull, two stars orbiting a shared center of gravity. Cassian reached out, his fingers tracing the scars on her neck where the silver silk had burned her. His touch was reverent, almost painful in its tenderness. "I have lived for 500 years, Aveline. I have seen empires rise and fall like the tide. I have seen the stars change their positions in the sky while I stayed the same. But I have never seen a spirit as fierce as yours. They thought they were throwing away a girl. They didn't realize they were discarding a queen." "I didn't choose to be fierce," she whispered, her eyes locking onto his golden ones. "I was forced into it by the people I loved." "The best steel is forged in the hottest fire," he countered, "and the most beautiful gems are formed under the greatest pressure." He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. For a moment, time seemed to stop entirely. The sounds of the approaching army, the cold of the mountain, the weight of the past. It all vanished. There was only the heat of his presence and the steady, rhythmic thrum of the mountain beneath their feet, a heartbeat they both shared. "When you return," he said, his voice a low, rough command, "you will not return as a victim seeking pity. You will return as the rightful heir to the lands they stole. You will be the queen of the hollow and the protector of the peaks, my equal in all things." "With you at my side?" "Always," he promised, "even if the sun itself tries to tear us apart." Aveline closed her eyes, letting the truth of his words sink into her new, cold blood. She had been betrayed by her family, her lover, and her kingdom. But in the heart of a monster, she had found a king who saw her clearly. In the darkness of the night, she had finally found her light. But the peace was short-lived. A sudden, sharp vibration shook the floor of the vault, sending a cascade of dust from the ceiling. Aveline's eyes snapped open, glowing with a sudden, predatory fire. "They've started," she said. "The siege engines," Cassian confirmed, his jaw tightening as he looked toward the stairs. "They are trying to break the gates before the moon is high." "Let them try," Aveline said, her voice turning cold and sharp as a glacier. "I have a welcoming party planned that they will never forget." The first explosion echoed through the pass, just as the moon reached its zenith, a dull roar that shook the very foundations of the citadel. Aveline stood on the highest battlements, her black cloak billowing in the freezing wind like the wings of a great bird of prey. Below her, the valley was no longer a white expanse of snow. It was a sea of orange fire and black smoke. The storm-born army had moved their catapults into range under the cover of the evening mist, hurling great jars of pitch against the iron gates of the pass. The gates held. They were older and stronger than human memory, but the heat was intense, sending plumes of black smoke spiraling into the sky like a signal fire. "They are impatient," Cassian said, appearing at her side without a sound. He was dressed for war, his black armor etched with silver runes that seemed to pulse with a faint, violet light, reflecting the magic of the mountain. "They think we are hiding," Aveline said, her eyes tracking the movements of the soldiers below with terrifying precision. "They think we are afraid of their fire." "They don't understand that we are the fire," Cassian replied. He handed her a bow made of bone-white wood, its string a shimmering thread of silver that hummed when she touched it. This was the bow of the first Queen of the Hollow. It is said that its arrows never miss, for they are guided by the wind of the mountain and the intent of the heart. Evelyn took the bow, feeling its weight settle into her hand. It felt familiar, as if it had been waiting for her for centuries. A piece of her soul returned. She reached into the quiver at her hip and pulled out an arrow tipped with obsidian, the fletching made from the feathers of a raven. "Who is leading the charge?" she asked, her voice calm. Cassian pointed to a figure on a white horse, positioned just behind the first line of infantry, safely out of range of ordinary archers. Even through the smoke and the distance, Aveline recognized the golden hair and the arrogant, straight-backed posture of a man who believed the world owed him everything. "Aldrich," she hissed, the name tasting like poison. "He is surrounded by his immortal guard," Cassian noted. "Men who have been told that the Vampire King is a myth and that you were killed by a rogue wolf. They are fighting for a lie which makes them dangerous but fragile." "Then I shall show them the truth," Aveline said. She stepped onto the crenellated edge of the wall, balanced precariously over the abyss. She didn't feel fear. She felt only a cold, crystalline focus. She notched the arrow, pulled the silver string to her ear, and took a deep breath of the freezing air. She didn't need to aim with her eyes. She aimed with the tether. She didn't aim for Aldrich. Not yet. She wanted him to suffer first. She aimed for the lead catapult, the one that was currently being reloaded with a massive jar of burning oil. She released the arrow. It didn't whistle through the air. It screamed. It was a bolt of silver light that sliced through the darkness, hitting the jar of oil just as it was being hoisted into the air. The resulting explosion was spectacular. A wall of fire erupted in the middle of the human line, scattering soldiers like dolls and lighting up the night like a second sun. The screams of the horses drifted up to the battlements, followed by the frantic shouting of the officers trying to restore order. Aveline didn't stop. She notched another arrow, and another. Each one found its mark with supernatural accuracy. A supply wagon, a siege engine, a cluster of officers. She was a shadow in the night, a vengeful spirit raining fire down upon those who had discarded her. She felt the power of the bow growing with every shot, the silver string singing a song of reckoning. Below, Aldrich Stormborn looked up. He couldn't see her clearly. The smoke and the fire provided her a perfect veil, but he saw the silhouette of a woman against the moon. He saw the way the fire reflected in her eyes, even from a mile away. "Impossible," he whispered, his voice lost in the chaos of his dying army. "Aveline." Aveline lowered her bow. She looked down at the man who had promised her a life of love, and then handed her a cup of poison. She saw the fear beginning to etch itself into his face, the dawning realization that the beast hadn't taken her life. It had given her a new one. "Not Aveline," she whispered to the wind, a cold smile touching her lips. "Your queen." She turned to Cassian, her face a mask of cold determination. "They are breaking. Their morale is gone, and the fire is turning against them. But they will regroup by morning," Cassian warned, his golden eyes scanning the horizon. "They have numbers on their side, and Aldrich is too proud to retreat after the first blow." "Then we don't give them until morning," Aveline said, her voice turning into a command. "We go down there. Now. We finish this before the sun can touch the valley and give them hope." Cassian smiled, a flash of white fangs in the dark. He reached out and took her hand. "As you wish, my queen." They moved together, two shadows leaping from the wall, descending into the heart of the storm. The girl who was betrayed was gone, buried under the snow. The queen had arrived, and she was bringing the night with her. The descent into the valley was not a fall, but a glide. Aveline felt the wind rushing past her ears, a roar that synchronized with the surge of the hollow in her veins. Beside her, Cassian was a streak of ink against the burning backdrop of the camp. They landed together, not with a crash, but with a silent impact that sent a shockwave of cold through the mud and slush. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and iron. To Aveline's new senses, the camp was a tapestry of heat signatures, frantic heartbeats glowing like dying embers in the dark. Panic is a living thing, and tonight it was her companion. The soldiers of the Immortal Guard, men hand-picked for their supposed bravery, were stumbling over their own spears. To them, she and Cassian were not just enemies. They were the nightmare made flesh. "Don't kill them all," Aveline whispered, her voice carrying through the din of clashing steel and crackling fire with an impossible clarity. "I want them to tell the story. I want the survivors' guilt to be the tax they pay for their treason." Cassian didn't speak. He didn't need to. He moved with a lethality that was almost beautiful to behold. His black steel sword was a blur, not striking to kill, but to disarm and dismantle. He was the hurricane, and she was the eye of the storm. Every time a blade came near him, the air itself seemed to thicken, slowing the human strikes until they were meaningless. Aveline moved toward the command tent. She didn't run. She flickered, a shadow step that left after-images of her in the retinas of the terrified men. One moment she was by a burning supply wagon. The next she was standing before a line of archers. They loosed their arrows, but she was already behind them, the wind of her passing, knocking them from their feet like autumn leaves. She encountered Sebastian Fernwell near the perimeter. He was clutching a silver-edged dagger, his face pale and sweating under the firelight. He had always been the strategist, the one who whispered the cleverest lies into the king's ear. He saw her and froze, the silver blade trembling in his hand. "Aveline," he gasped, his eyes darting for an escape that didn't exist. We thought the king had... We were coming to save you. The reports were wrong." The lie was so hollow it almost made her laugh. She stepped into his personal space, the scent of his expensive clothes now tainted by the stench of his cowardice. She reached out and took the silver dagger from his hand. To a human, it was a weapon. To her, it was a toy. She squeezed, and the silver blade snapped like dry glass, the shards tinkling into the snow. "You were coming for the silver, Sebastian," she said, her voice like the grinding of tectonic plates deep beneath the earth. "You were coming to finish the murder you started in the banquet hall. Tell me, does the guilt taste as bitter as the wine you gave me?" She didn't strike him. Instead, she willed the shadows around his feet to rise. They coiled around his ankles like oily snakes, pinning him to the spot. The frost began to climb his boots, a slow, agonizing numbing. "Stay here," she commanded. "Watch the sky. I want you to see the exact moment your world ends." She left him screaming for guards who were already fleeing. The air was getting colder. Cassian's presence was drawing the heat from the valley, turning the mud into treacherous ice. The catapults were silent now, their operators either dead or hiding. The orange glow of the fires reflected in the widening pools of blood, creating a macabre, shimmering path toward the center of the camp. She saw him then, standing at the edge of the royal pavilion. Aldrich. He had drawn his sword, a gold-hilted thing that looked pathetic in the face of the mountain's wrath. Beside him stood Celestia, her fine silk gown ruined by the soot, her eyes wide with a terror that no Lakewood had ever known. Aveline stopped 10 paces away. The fire from a nearby catapult licked at the sky, casting long, distorted shadows across her face. She felt her heart beat, slow, steady, and utterly different from the frantic rhythm of the man before her. "Aldrich," she said. The name, once a prayer on her lips, was now a sentence. Aldrich's hand trembled so violently the gold hilt clattered against his armor. He looked at her, then at the shadow-clad king who was slowly closing the circle behind them, his golden eyes glowing like twin stars. You are a monster," Aldrich whispered, his voice cracking. "I am exactly what you made me," Aveline replied. "And tonight, the monster collects its due." Inside the royal pavilion, the air tasted of desperation, spilled wine and expensive incense. It was a space designed for luxury, now transformed into a cage. Aveline stood before the 2 people who had shared her childhood, her secrets, and ultimately, her death. The contrast was jarring. They were huddled together, shivering in their finery, while she stood tall, a creature of starlight and shadow. Celestia was the first to break. She fell to her knees, her hands reaching out as if to touch the hem of Aveline's cloak, then pulling back in instinctive fear. "Aveline, please! It was Aldrich's idea. He said the realm was starving. He said the treaty required a sacrifice. He said you were the only one strong enough to handle the journey." "Strong enough to die alone in the snow?" Aveline asked, her voice devoid of anger, which made it all the more terrifying. She looked at her cousin, seeing the vanity and the weakness that had always been there, hidden under layers of lace and false smiles. "You cried when the wagon pulled away, Celestia. I saw your face through the slats. Were those tears for me, or for the realization that you were finally the only Lakewood left to marry the king?" Celestia sobbed, her face buried in her hands. The sound was pathetic, a thin, high-pitched wail that was swallowed by the silence of the tent. Aveline turned her gaze to Aldrich. He hadn't knelt. He stood with a stiff, brittle pride, his sword still pointed at her heart, though the tip dipped toward the ground. "You can't take the throne, Aveline. You are a creature of the night. The people, the church, they will never follow a vampire. You are a curse upon the land." "The people are already following me, Aldrich," she said, stepping forward. Each step was heavy with the weight of the mountain. "They are following the fire I set to save them from your incompetence. They are following the truth that their high king hid in his tent while his sacrifice stood her ground against the gods of the night." Cassian stepped into the light of the tent's entrance. He didn't say a word, but his presence was an anchor of absolute authority. The shadows in the room seemed to bow toward him. He looked at Aveline, waiting for her command, his silent support a roar in her mind. "Give me the crown, Aldrich," Aveline said. "Not for the gold, but for the symbol of the lie you've lived." "Never," Aldrich hissed. Driven by a final, desperate surge of ego, he lunged. It was a slow, clumsy movement. To Aveline, his muscles were telegraphing every intent. She didn't use a weapon. She didn't even use the bow. She simply reached out and caught the blade of his sword with her bare hand. The steel bit into her palm, drawing a drop of dark, thick blood. But she felt no pain, only a dull, distant pressure. With a sharp, effortless twist of her wrist, she shattered the blade into a dozen jagged pieces. She grabbed him by the throat and lifted him off the ground with a strength that defied her slender frame. Aldrich clawed at her arm, his feet kicking uselessly in the air, his face turning a dark, bruised purple. "I could kill you now," she whispered, her golden eyes inches from his, glowing with the fire of the hollow. I could let the mountain drink your soul until there is nothing left but a husk to be scattered by the wind. It would be justice. It would be easy. She felt the tether to Cassian pulse, a warm, steady beat of approval. He was ready to let her do it. He was ready to be her executioner. But she also felt the weight of the history she had learned in the archives. A queen does not kill out of spite. She kills for peace, or she spares for power. She threw him to the floor at Celestia's feet. He collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut. "You are stripped of your titles," Aveline declared, her voice projecting through the camp, amplified by the wind so that every soldier who still lived could hear the decree. "You are stripped of your lands. You will walk back to the capital, and you will tell them that the Lakewood bloodline has returned. You will tell them that the Hollow is no longer a grave, but a fortress that protects the borders you were too weak to hold." "And if we refuse?" Eldrick managed to wheeze, clutching his throat. Aveline looked at Cassian. He stepped forward, the torchlight catching the sharp points of his fangs as he smiled, a slow, terrifying expression of ancient hunger. "Then the king will be hungry," she said, "and I will not be here to stop him." She reached out and plucked the golden circlet from Aldrich's head. It felt light, hollow, and insignificant. She didn't put it on. Instead, she crushed it in her fist, the soft gold buckling and snapping, until it was a useless, misshapen lump of metal. She dropped it into the mud. "I don't need your crown to be a queen," she said. She turned and walked out of the tent, her black cloak billowing behind her like a shroud. Outside, the sun was beginning to touch the highest peaks of the mountains, a thin line of pale pink light. The human army had surrendered, thousands of men laying their weapons in the snow in a silent, collective admission of defeat. They didn't look at her with just fear. They looked with awe. They saw the girl who had conquered the dark and returned with its power. The return to the citadel was a procession of shadows and light. Tanith was waiting for them at the great iron gates, her silver coins clinking as she bowed so low her forehead touched the cold stone. "The mountain has spoken," she whispered, her eyes moist with a rare, ancient emotion. "The queen has come home, and the winter of our waiting is over." Aveline walked through the halls of her former prison. They no longer felt cold or oppressive. They felt like a sanctuary, a living history book that she now had the power to write. She went to the grand hall, to the mirrors she had once avoided in her grief. She looked at herself, the pale, luminous skin, the silver scars on her neck that looked like delicate jewelry, the eyes that held the wisdom of 5 centuries of sorrow. She didn't see a monster. She saw a survivor who had become a sovereign. Cassian found her on the highest balcony as the first true day of spring began. The valley below was peaceful now, the scars of the battle being covered by a fresh, clean blanket of snow that seemed to wash the earth clean of the night's violence. "The human lords have sent their envoys," he said, standing close enough that she could feel the hum of his power, a constant, comforting vibration. "They offer peace, they offer tribute, they offer to recognize your claim to all the Lakewood lands, and more." "And what do we offer them in return?" she asked, her voice steady. "Protection," Cassian said, "for a price. No more tributes, no more discarded children, no more blood-soaked treaties. We are the guardians of the border now. We are the wall that keeps the real monsters at bay." He turned to face her, his expression uncharacteristically soft, his golden eyes losing their predatory sharpness for a moment. He reached into the folds of his cloak and pulled out a ring. Not gold, but carved from the black rose of the garden, its center a single glowing piece of mountain crystal that seemed to pulse with its own internal light. "I gave you the essence," he said, his voice a low, rough velvet. "I gave you the mountain, but I never gave you the choice that you deserved. I have been a cold, silent thing for 500 years, Ovelyn. I thought my heart had turned to stone. But it beats for you. It beats for the girl who had every reason to hate the world and instead chose to rule it." Aveline took the ring, sliding it onto her finger. The connection between them flared, a bond of fate, blood, and a love that defied the laws of life and death. It was a tether that would never break, a promise that neither crown nor curse could ever dissolve. "We are the monsters they feared," she whispered, leaning her head against his shoulder. "No," Cassian replied, kissing her forehead. "We are the legends they needed, and legends never die." As the sun rose higher, casting a long, regal shadow over the forbidden peaks, Aveline felt a sense of absolute, crystalline freedom. She was no longer bound by the expectations of men, the cruelty of her kin, or the limitations of her past. She was the queen of the hollow, the bride of the night, and her reign had only just begun. The world would remember the name Aveline Lakewood, not as a sacrifice, but as the woman who turned a betrayal into a kingdom. Aveline's story is a testament to the fact that betrayal is not the end, but a transformation. From the frozen wagon to the heights of the citadel, she proved that even the most broken heart can find strength in the dark. She returned not as the girl they discarded, but as the queen they could never hope to conquer. Her love for Cassian became the bridge between the world of the living and the world of the eternal, a flame that burns forever in the heart of the mountain. If you enjoyed this cinematic journey through the shadows, please like, share, and subscribe for more tales of destiny and dark romance. May your own path lead you from the winter of betrayal to the dawn of your own power.